Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Savor Food Body. We're doing things a little bit different this week, and hopefully this is what we're going to do more of too, because you all have been listening to me for the last month and a half. And I want to start bringing on some folks that are also experts in their own Savor Food and Body journey and their experience with maybe they've been dieting in the past or been chronic dieters or disordered eaters, and sharing their relationship with food and body story, and then also how they came into recovering from that and finding safer food and body. So just my usual disclaimer is that any of these interviews are just for information and education purposes only. They're not a substitute for nutrition counseling or mental health counseling. So please just take what you need and leave the rest. And today, my guest is Audra Hauser. Audra and I have been friends for a while. She was also a client of mine at one time, and she has a really great story. She's a flight attendant, a senior level flight attendant, and she's got a great story on how working in a very aesthetic driven industry, especially back in the day when she started as a flight attendant, affected her relationship with food and body, and how she's now come back on full circle to finding her own intuition with food in her body and being able to savor food in her body. So in addition to being a flight attendant, she is also a Be Body Positive leader and body positive facilitator and a body image coach. So join me in welcoming Audra Hauser. Thanks so much for being here today, Audra.
It's gonna be fun. Thank you.
So let's dive into, tell us about your background as a flight attendant, and what was it like back in the day, in the Pan Am days, and how that started to affect your relationship with food in your body.
Right. I started flying. I'd always wanted to be a flight attendant. So for me to get accepted as a flight attendant at the age of 19 or 20 was really exciting for me.
Mhm.
I was worried though, because I'd heard, flight attendants had to be just so that was back in the day when they'd put us on a scale and calibrate us, and everything was micromanaged from our weight to how we looked to our nail polish to everything was very aesthetic. And you had to look the part, and you had to also fit all these other criterias of knowing languages and whatnot. I remember thinking, though, I'm already thin. I grew up with thin privilege. So at that time, I really had no concept of what it was like to live in a body that was larger than what the ideal is in society. So I saw a lot of the flight attendants in training. They were really chastised. They were encouraged to do things to make that weight. Every week we had a weigh-in. Um, and I thought to myself, my gosh, in my mind, I thought, ooh, you don't ever want to get to that position where you're put on probation because you're over a weight limit, all weight, and I never had that problem. I was lucky. I was already an intuitive eater. I just ate. I never put thought into it. It wasn't until later on that, as my body changed, as a young woman's does, I started, maybe gaining a little weight, and I thought, oh, my uniform felt a little tight. So that sort of sparked a little bit of dieting for me, because at the time, this was maybe the late 80s, and people had just started doing slimming clubs in England and Jack LaLanne in New York, and the idea of health equaled thinness was really idolized. And because I had thin privilege at the time, I thought, oh well, no big deal. It just kind of starts planting that seed for, thin equals healthy, equals better, equals more valued as a human being, equals better pay, better jobs. I couldn't have gotten that job as a flight attendant if I was over a weight restriction. The first thing they did when they interviewed was, hello, welcome, please step on the scale. And so that really was a starting influence, along with other things throughout my childhood that I heard from family members thinking, oh, they make comments about people, or, even flight attendants. It's like there's this hierarchy of being because you are this person that lives in this body and you were so privileged to get this job, and then you relate privilege with thinness, and it just kind of gets very contorted and messed up. And then then I started thinking, well, I don't feel like how those girls felt, so I need to manage this and take care of it now. So that's
That
probably how.
that always amazed me when you mentioned that the first time that you had to do weigh-ins at interviews or just periodically throughout. I don't know if it was once a year or however they managed
Once
that,
a
but
week. Once a
once a week.
week.
Oh my gosh, like that. When you first said that to me, I was like, there's so much wrong with that. But again, like now we know better, we do better. We can't look at the way things were in the 70s and 80s with
Right.
21st century glasses on. But yeah, to have your job, and how stressful to have your
Oh,
job dependent on what your body weighs. And now
God.
that we're diving into more social justice aspects of that, like there's so much wrong with that. But again, like if we know now and we do better now. But man, that must have been so challenging, and having your livelihood hanging on whatever that scale is going to say.
Yes and no, it's changed. So fast forward to now, I've been flying over 30 years, and there is still that entrenched thought, that
Mm,
valley that's been kind of neurologically wired in your brain, that this we live in a society that idolizes a certain body type. And unfortunately, it's not true, but unfortunately, that's kind of hard to break that. Even for people that are starting this journey, or for me, you still look and you think, wow, you're still aware of it. So, as flying now, there's still this imagery that people associate with a flight attendant.
mhm,
And if a flight attendant is bigger than what people think that the flight attendant should be, they will say
mhm,
something to, oh, she sure is bigger. Well, she's sure big for a flight attendant. For a flight attendant. Like, wow, that there's just like doing this work and seeing it be more of a social justice thing, and watching how people still, it's like we're still backwards. It's just, we don't weigh flight attendants anymore. They've said it's illegal to do. You can't do
mhm,
that. And, not to mention demoralizing, but the fact that it's still kind of, the, the, the flames are still kind of rustled up all the time, when no,
mhm,
they kind of eased it when they said, well, your weight just needs to be proportion to your height. Well, that depends on who's interviewing you, number one. Number two,
mhm,
I know several folks now, several flight attendants are in a larger body that would never have been accepted, and they're great flight attendants. They'll find a way to get out the window if the plane is burning. They'll figure it out. But
mhm,
I'm just shocked at how people still say things that's so, to this day, when I'm on a leave, but when I am flying, people still talk about the latest, greatest diet and wellness thing, because we don't really
mhm,
say we diet these days. It's kind of politically incorrect,
mhm.
but we'll just kind of still go along with that. It's still like the big thing is now the flight attendants are like, oh, I'm on a leave for COVID. I can't fit into my pants. Well, it never occurred to them to get a different size of pants. Maybe to be comfortable, they're going to force themselves. I know I've done it myself. So
Yeah. And the
it's still hard.
stigma that comes with the idea that you have to get a different size pant. And
Right.
isn't it interesting that we only feel that stigma if we have to get a bigger size pant? Like,
Right.
people are cheering and jumping through the roofs if they have to get a smaller size pant. And so it's not that
Right.
just the idea of like changing your pant size, it's stigmatized to that I have to get a bigger size now.
Yeah. And we even joke about it in a way that we think is funny and joking, but
Mhm,
really, it's really not. It's really
mhm,
not for those people that might be going through their own internal hell, that might be starting
mhm,
this journey of saying, you know what, I choose sanity over thinness. And they're just perpetuating it. They're taking that judgmental stick and poking the pooch and rustling up the flames, making it worse for people, probably not intending to do harm, but
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people too, like when I was back thick into my managing my weight, I'd lost my weight and now I'm going to manage it to stay here. You're
Mm-hmm.
so laser focused that you become, like, who did I think I was to judge people? Who did I think I was? And I always thought that's so rude to do. I never wanted to do that to anyone else, but yet I did it to myself. So,
Yeah. What was that like for you to kind of transition out of, because you were still working in the flight attendant industry as you are
yeah.
now. So what was that like to still be a part of that industry and then, go through your various shapes of form of dieting and weight control and then come to that point where you were ready to transition out of that mindset, but you were still working in this industry, that you were still trying to deal with that stigma. What was that like to transition your mindset while your lived experience was still in that, not only in diet culture but in the flight attendant culture too? What was
Right.
that like?
So there is always a reminder, which you always think if you're going to do something. I think too, some of my friends that are alcoholics say, I don't want to go to a bar. It might like rouse things up. What are you going to do in life to escape this? It's everywhere, from a billboard to the ingrained thought that each of us have in society, in every society. You can't really do that. So when you start doing that, you make your world small, small. But then maybe later on, I know several folks that are recovering alcoholics and they're flight attendants, or they work in the food and beverage industry and they serve it. So they've learned skills and tools to overcome that, and
Mm-hmm.
support, constant support. So I think for me, really just I'm big into the research and the science of it. So when I understood that, it was easy for me to see how many other things society does to say something, and we all just kind of go along with it like a flock of sheep, and we all just kind of go along with it. But it's like, is that of value for you? And I'm also the type of person to flip the middle finger to people and say, screw that. That's not right. That's not accurate. And I'm going to do my own thing. And if you don't like it, FO. That being said, that's easy for me to say, but there was a lot of hurtful moments. I had decided that I am going to value sanity over thinness. It was insane what I was doing. It was when I took a step outside of myself and thought, this doesn't feel right. Number one, this this isn't health. This isn't health. Number two, my mental health has to account for something. And if I'm doing this just to be loved and appreciated, and it really showed me when I said, forget it, I'm going to start my intuitive eating journey. And I had come into a larger body than what people were used to seeing me as. I still wasn't what some people would call living in, it just depends. I don't like that. She's overweight. Over what weight? Over this weight or that weight? Your pregnancy weight, your high school weight? Which, on another note, always bothered me, because why do we, especially women, men too, think that we need to still be in the jeans we wore when damn high school? Number one, those jeans are out of style. I know they'll come back in. But number two, that's insane. Our bodies change. And the fact that we're so stuck in not wanting to embrace and allow change is super frustrating. And also, when you really start knowing about diet culture and dieting and trying to maintain that thin ideal that's perfect, that's just overrated, you really start seeing how it was a social injustice. It's a form of oppression. And I thought, if I'm not going to oppress anybody else for whatever reason, their sexual orientation, their religion, their ethnicity, the color of their skin, then why in the hell am I going to oppress myself? It's the biggest form of self-oppression, of oppression, is on yourself. And I thought I wouldn't do that to anybody else, yet I'm in diet culture, and that's so oppressive. And I refuse to do anything that's oppressive to myself anymore. So it was an easy decision, but then living with people making comments. People can be cruel. they were super passive aggressive about asking me if I'm still healthy or if I'm still doing that diet or still contacting me for weight loss ideas because everybody looked at me like, oh, Audra knows how to do it. She's done it all. She's your go-to gal. And I even did some coaching on how to keep your weight off. Shame to say, but I did. And I just, I just would tell people, look, hey, I was in a really raw spot. And to say that when you didn't know what I was going through, like, would you tell someone who had surgery or a transplant or something like that, or wow, you've gained a lot of weight. Maybe they needed to gain weight for sustaining their life, their well-being. But people don't know that. We're so fixated on, like, I can just remember when I lost the weight, people coming up and saying, the women typically would say, oh, you look great. How did you do it? You lost so much weight. You look amazing. And I'm like, oh, thank you. So in my mind, I thought, so I must have looked horrible. I must keep this up to be validated by these people who A, don't pay my bills or do probably don't give a shit about me, and half of them I don't even talk to anymore, but they're not the type of people I'd want to impress anymore. And so the men would say, a lot of the pilots, it's interesting, would come up and they'd say, are you okay? I think they thought I went through, one of them thought I went through therapy or treatment for something. And he thought I wasn't sure if you had cancer or you lost weight because you were sick. I just want to make sure you're okay. So two different viewpoints. And it's interesting to me that there were some men too that were like, oh my God, you look amazing. What did you do? Like, I don't know. I had my something amputated. I went through this. Why do you ask? I felt like saying that. And now I do that when people say, so are you still working out a lot? And are you still coaching on weight loss and weight maintenance? And I was like, totally shifted. Why do you ask? You know what? The reason those people say things too is if they're in the thick of this in diet culture, they're probably doing the same thing I did too. Like, there has to fucking be a better way than constantly perseverating or ruminating over what can I do? How can I keep this way, And I don't know. That was a long roundabout way of
No, I think that's perfect. And what I think was super interesting about that is just what you said about the men's perspective, because and it can go both ways. And I shouldn't say just men. I mean, women could do this too. Is that the amount of people that would check in with you when you were at your thinnest and saying, "Hey, are you okay? Are you sick?" And then the flip side of that, people praising you for the fitness and for that smaller size body. And unfortunately, and this is just my perception, it feels like in our culture that those praising comments are more common than the people checking in, unless the person, like, people really know you and they knew what your body was like. They're more in your intimate circle of friends,
right,
then the concern level can be different. But that validation for your body becoming thinner is so huge and can really fuel the continuation then of disordered eating behaviors
oh,
and the
yeah,
chronic dieting wellness lifestyle plans. And then again, just to highlight, what the pilots were saying, or the men were saying, I think that's, in a way, it's nice to hear that there were also guys that were checking in for your well-being and not just commenting and celebrating the thinness and kind of objectifying your body for the thinness part of it. They were generally checking in on your well-being, and that's great to hear, to be honest, because I think we associate more the male gaze with the thinness appraisal,
right,
and that's not true across the board. I mean, again, it's just challenging another stereotype too.
right,
So
right.
yeah, I think that was interesting to hear for
Yeah.
that.
And it
And then
was
how did
interesting.
you? I was gonna say, how did you, as you were going through the, okay, I'm not going to diet anymore, I'm not going to go through this restriction anymore, how did you eventually find intuitive eating and starting to use that as a tool, as a framework for you to get beyond the diet, wellness, lifestyle stuff you were doing?
Right. I when I decided that I my sanity was more important than thinness because I was going down a big, deep, dark rabbit hole. I did a
Mhm.
lot of research. That's something I love to do. And I started researching why diets don't work. And, one thing led to another. I found a person that supported that. I listened to their podcast. Another person that they were interviewed by or interviewed them, I would follow them. And I started emerging myself and submerging myself with this information, just thinking, well, this is interesting. How come I never knew this? Why didn't I know this? How didn't I know this? How do other people not know this? And then realizing the diet culture is over $1 billion industry and wants your money, and they really don't care about your well-being. They don't care. And if there was something like that, we would all be thin and so-called healthy. But then I realized health is not just thinness. And sometimes being thin doesn't mean you're healthy. There's so many other metrics of health, as I learned when I met you. So how I got into it was through following different people through podcasts and really hearing some of them talk about in intuitive eating in the book, Elise and Ellen, the authors. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I read that book a long time ago and it didn't work for me. And then as soon as I said that, one of the gals on this particular podcast said, it didn't work for you because you did it with a diet mentality. And I started thinking about this process of how I was going through reframing something that I was so sold on was part of my being, was part of my inner being of happiness and everything I related to it. If I can reframe that, and so I picked up a copy of Intuitive Eating again, and I got the workbook, and I started working through it by myself. And as I was reading it, I was like, gosh, this just, God, if I could do this, I would feel, just reading it made me feel like, ha, well, if I could do that, I would feel better. But I was like, well, if I have the idea to feel better, I can feel better. And I just sort of worked through it on my own, which, a lot of people can do, but I would recommend working with someone like you, like a coach. But that's how I found it. And I worked through it. And it was right before we were going to go on vacation. I remember to Italy. And I thought, this is perfect because when my husband and I do our vacation, Europe vacation, that was the one time that gave me peace. Like I forgot about the plan that I was on at the time and I just lived my life. And I probably binged a little bit more too because I thought, oh, when I get back home, I'm not going to be doing this. So I might as well have all I can now. So there was a little bit of that. But this truly was the first time I put into practice the intuitive eating fundamentals. And I really just sat with it. And on vacation, I thought, I'm never going to go back to that. I'm never going to go back to a plan. I'm committing right now because it's that one saying that once you know all this information, why would I go back to dieting again? That's actually complete insanity. And so it's like trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And I thought, I felt myself make this huge, just completely 180, just complete 180. But it didn't mean I wasn't afraid. I still had a lot of fear, and I walked through this, sometimes dipping my toes in certain the principles, but I moved through them really quickly because in my mind I thought, I'm done. And that vacation was the best vacation because I sat there on top of the hill on the Amalfi Coast, looking out, crying, thinking, I just had the most beautiful Italian sandwich for lunch. I'm looking over this, not even thinking about I'm going to enjoy it while I can, but in the back of my mind, oh, I'm going to get back on this plan when I get home. I truly was able to be satisfied and be in the moment. And with that satisfaction, it was separate. And then I could enjoy the view. It sunk in every cell of my being. It was different. And I knew this is a really good feeling. I'm going to have this forever. There's some things that I had to work through for sure, but that is definitely how I found intuitive eating. And I had read it and I'd been doing it uh, for, I believe, a year and a half before I met you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I felt like
Yeah.
I had intuitive eating. I was really solid. I even had people ask me as I come into a little bit larger body than what I wanted. But this is what my body wants, and I'm good with it. We're partners now. I don't see my body as something that I'm fighting against, trying to manipulate her into being something that I want her to be. Somehow, if I want her to be something else, that implies the implication is that I'm separate from her. So there's this huge separation of yourself and your body. And when this process starts to kind of merge you back together, you can really, really experience embodiment and things that go beyond eating. And it's not about the food. Food just happens to be involved in it because, anyway, so that's how I found intuitive eating. It was a happy mistake.
I love that, a happy mistake. And I love what you were just talking about too of embodiment. And I I didn't really pay attention to that word, or I hadn't heard that word in association to this work really until the last couple of years when I started becoming a um, body positive facilitator and taking the trainings with the body positive, and hearing that word in connection to breaking up with diet culture and how, like you were saying, dieting keeps you separate from your body. And you can't go through the complete healing process being separate from your body. That's, I think, in a way, by kind of look at it at a big picture terms, that's the hope that diet culture has for its business plan, is that you
Oh,
stay
yeah.
separate from your body. Because if you're separate from your body and just your mind is running the show, then it can interpret and internalize those lists of eat this, don't eat this, the diet prescriptions, the wellness prescriptions. But if you're in your body, then you start to notice, well, those foods don't work for me, or I'm starving. I need to eat those other foods on the forbidden list.
Yeah.
And so becoming embodied, and I find this with my other clients too, becoming embodied is kind of like the linchpin to being able to leave that whole diet culture world behind and
Mm-hmm.
come into your own skin. And not to say that the body image part of things isn't also fraught and challenging and a lot of work. It totally is. But I almost think, and I hate to put things like in order, and because like a hierarchy can then get created. But I almost think someone needs to get back in touch with their body, needs to have that embodied experience
Mm-hmm.
in order to move towards the healing the body image part of things.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be coming in touch with that critical voice and getting in touch with, where did your critical voice even learn those messages that it's trying to tell you about yourself and trying to tell you that you're not good enough. And all of that work has to be done in your body, and even just noticing, okay, when I tell myself this critical thought, what does that feel like in my body? I'm constantly telling clients, asking them to check in, whether it's with a food that they ate or a thought that they had. How does that feel in your body? What sensations are you feeling? What tension in muscles, or how's your digestive tract feel? Like, what does that feel like in your body? So I love that you brought that up, and that this concept of being embodied, get into your body, is really kind of a, like I said, the cornerstone, the
Yep.
foundation of being able to move into a solid intuitive eating practice, or even a savor food and body practice. And I think that's a good segue into, just this concept of savor food and body. What does that mean to you, and how does that tie to what you were saying about this needing to become more connected to your body.
Right. Savor Food and Body. Savor. I love that you have that Savor Food and Body. That was actually a huge thing in how I found you too. Plus, when I saw your website, I was like, she seems like she's kind and Savor Food and Body. And I think you just kind of started doing Savor Food and Body things when I met you. So it's almost like it was meant to be at the time. Savoring Food and Body. I think that when you quit things and your embodiment is blunted, it's shunted there, it just can't get through. And when I was sitting there in Italy, I just bring back that we've had so many amazing trips. I can remember so many of them sitting there thinking, oh, I just ate that, oh, maybe I'm allergic, maybe this, it's just overthinking everything. And finally, when I was on that hill on the Amalfi Coast thinking, I saw that critical voice, but it wasn't part of me. and
Mm.
and the Italians, and every culture have something for savoring, and that's part of the Japanese culture too. Another, is that's part of eating is savoring it and enjoying it, and all these cultures that do that. And then there's this American gal that decides to go with her Canadian husband and sit on a hill. And I sat there and I saw that other person separate from me. That's interesting that I could visualize and feel that it was separate, that person saying, like, I'm like, that's not even me anymore. And it's interesting when it's that fast. It's like the flick of a light switch. It just takes you a long time to maybe walk to that light switch and turn it on. But the reframing of it the work has already been laid. And I think that voice, that critical voice, wasn't part of me. And I realized I'm in this beautiful country where people savor body. They savor their body no matter what it looks like. They savor life. They savor their food. Food is life. It's a part of life. It's not this separate entity that we get to control. They're all equal at different times, some more than not. There's a time and a place for eating. There's a time and a place for satisfaction. They look at this so differently. And I just remember the waiter saying that day, it's so satisfying. And I thought, yes, like a Snicker bar. When they had that commercial, it's so satisfying. There are
Oh
so
yeah,
many elements.
satisfies your hunger or whatever with the
Yeah, it's
peanuts
all
and yeah.
salty and sweet. And that's life. The good, the bad, the ugly, the messy, the hurtful, the painful, the joy. And I think when we can embody and lean into every bit of that, that equals savoring. I just think savor, I think you have more of appreciation for that. Interestingly, so these other cultures that haven't been through diet mentality, intuitively and instinctually, they seem to know that this is savoring and satisfying. But we have limitations in this country and maybe other cultures too. I think diet mentality is everywhere in the world, but of you can only have satisfaction. We want to control everything. We're not as free with even our sexuality as other cultures are. And when I say that, we should have satisfaction in that area of our life. And when you truly have satisfaction and you can savor the satisfying moments, and it's separate from any judgment or thought. It's just you're in this moment. You really, it's amazing how it works. It's counterintuitive. People would think, like, if I just allowed myself to be satisfied for a meal, I would just go to town on everything. And I'm like, you think, but everybody thinks that. But you have to really let go and just immerse yourself in it. I think people are so afraid to do that because, again, we live in a culture where, and if you're already in a larger body, you don't want to get larger. And then there's this stigma of that they're not trying. If you're not trying for your health, you're a piece of crap. It's just all such bullshit. But I think savoring food and body, and when I met you, I was like, oh, I just love your vibe. And it felt like the vibe that I got that one, and it wasn't anything different about that trip. It was my mindset. and it was the embodiment. And I think you have to have the mindset and the body embodiment. And once you really truly learn how to embody something, um, everything is richer. You know, maybe you feel things more. Maybe I just don't know. I just think, again, how can you go back if you have that skill? It's like they say, riding a bike. You don't, most people that really maybe dip their toe in intuitive eating and then just kind of put it on the back burner, I feel so bad for them, because I'm just like, the joy and satisfaction that comes from savoring your food and body is,
Mhm.
it's like, it's an honorary thing that most cultures just accept, and that we act like, here I'm just so like happy that I've come to this place. Yet other cultures just kind of walk through and they're like, yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too. And when I'm thinking about well, why wouldn't you? Well, we don't, because of just what you were saying, the weight stigma, the fat phobia, those two pieces of the creating the fear around, well, if I savor my food, I'm never going to stop eating the food. If I have pleasure, I'm going to go off the rails and always only have pleasure. And so I think that there's that connection between weight stigma, weight bias, fat phobia, healthism, but then also the moralistic value, especially as women, the moralistic value around indulging and, uh, pleasure is sinful and all of that. I mean, and that can go down the whole realm again, and talking about sexuality, talking about religion, religious beliefs, all of that, much bigger conversations. But you're right to acknowledge that there are a lot of barriers that are in people's way to getting embodied and to feeling satisfaction and savoring those satisfying moments with food. And so not to make it sound like this is an impossible task for someone to go through. Like you said, it's absolutely doable, but just to recognize, especially when it's hard
Yeah.
to listen to comments or have people asking you questions about what you're doing, or have people, get concerned about your health because your body weight is going up. And when you have those hard moments, just being able to, again, like, flip on that light switch and go, this isn't me, that they're not commenting at me and about me. This is coming through a filter of weight stigma, weight bias, fat phobia, um, fear around pleasure, fear around satisfaction. And I think that's super important for people to notice, that those are cultural constructs that create that fear for them, and that put up those barriers that need to be gone around in order to heal that relationship with food in your body, and in order to be able to find that savor ability,
Yeah,
and
sure.
just being able to recognize that.
Yeah. I've also found too that one of the things that helped me was naming it out loud. I'm
Yeah.
that type of person that said in the beginning, what are going to be some of my challenges? And like 3 and 4 of them, you can name off the top of your head. Why don't we do anything? For fear of backlash, for fear of this, for fear we're going to get in trouble. So naming some of those barriers straight away, I think are a really good tool. You could put them in your shield as well. It's a barrier for me, but it can also turn into be a barrier from criticism from the outside world too. You can turn that around. Like, yeah, my barrier is I'm afraid that people are going to think I've let myself go. My barriers, people are going to think, wow, she was the epitome of health and fitness. And now look at her. She couldn't get her control, but you can take that shield and then turn it around, and maybe that'd be a reflection for someone else to see too, that might need help in this work. And I also think too, I'm also the type of person, not everybody would want to do this. I'm just super honest. You know me, whatever I say or whatever I think, I usually say. I do have a filter. sometimes I choose not to use it because I think people react better when they get something unfiltered. They're going to filter it anyways. They can refilter however they want what I say. But I think when people would come up to me and say things like that, um, for me, it's kind of like when you got hurt. I went through a divorce, like for an example, and someone asked me, or a breakup. How's your boyfriend? How's your husband? And I really wanted to talk about it with some people, and with other people I didn't, or maybe I was in a position. Same with food, my journey with this intuitive eating. Maybe I wanted to talk about it. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't want to spark other people who wanted to fight me on it, and mentally I wasn't in a place to do that, especially on the plane in a galley when there's people standing by. Some of your passengers might want to get involved in the conversation, or they might have a comment, or they're an expert because they say they are. It just kind of like anything else. Like if somebody would ask about a boyfriend or my ex-husband, and I'd want to cry, and I found the best way to deal with that is people are going to be people. They're going to be mean or they're going to be loving. And I've honestly found, believe it or not, when I say that this way, people are more loving and accepting. And if they're not, that's on them. But when I would say, for instance, going through a breakup, you know, um, one day maybe I'll tell you, but today I'm having a raw day and I'm doing a lot of personal work inside, so I could be the best version of me today. And it's kind of a raw day, so my heart's a little tender. So if you don't mind, I just wanted to let you know that. And 9 times out of 10, when someone sees that you've been hurt, they don't want to hurt you further. Now, taking that into my eating, I've had lots of flight attendants have opinions. They all want to give you their opinion. And decided that honesty was the best way. I didn't want to tell them stats. I didn't want to tell them, but did you know this? If they ask me, I have them all up my sleeve, because that's the kind of work I do now. But rather that than I would simply say to them, um, I went down a very dark path with disordered eating, and I'm in a place now where I am, when I was, I says, I'm working on healing my relationship with my food and my body. And it's a journey that I'm going through. And one day when I'm okay talking about it, maybe I'll share it with you. And they'd be like, oh, well, like, what do you mean? And now that I say, oh, I understand how, if somebody comes in the back and says, I better start my diet tomorrow in the back galley. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, oh, do you eat sugar now? Because before I might not have eaten a specific food, or, oh, are you eating this now? I thought you didn't eat that. And I was like, no, I eat it. And I have one and I move on. And they're like, oh, I couldn't just do that. I need to eat 8 of them. I was like, I used to be like that too. But, I've done a lot of work internally to be at peace and to heal my relationship with food and body. And I'm super glad I did. And, a lot of them, 9 times out of 10, they will never say anything mean to that. And if they do, what kind of a human being does that? If they want to say, I feel that way sometimes too. And that's all I do is I'm like, yeah, it's a process. And a lot of them have reached out saying, well, how did you do it? They're interested, but I remember being on that part too, interested enough to want to know, but not interested enough to let myself go, apparently. So that was that.
Yeah, and how I'm wondering too, just because it's this time of year, and I've had these conversations a lot recently. I mean, really kind of since Halloween. That's for a lot of people, that's the kickoff time of holiday eating or allowing permission with sweet foods or whatever it may be, and they're allowing themselves seasonal conditional permission, like, oh yeah, I can have whatever now because January's right around the corner, and I'm gonna get back on track, um, in January. And so, how has embracing the satisfaction and the savoring food, how has that changed your experience with the holidays?
Wow.
Holiday eating.
I was just thinking about this before we got on our call because I'm going to bake some banana bread. I love my banana bread. And I was thinking, how nice is it for me to be able to make those holiday traditional things that, I attach to being a child and joyful. And I think how it's changed now is I savor it, and it's satisfying because I allow that process to happen. I'm not shoveling in 5 cookies because I got to get back on it January 1st, like, or whatever date most people say, January 1st or the 2nd. And I'm able to make these things and not have to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to eat them all because there's nothing to get back on. I'm not on a wagon. I'm not on a plan. I'm on
Mm-hmm.
the Audra jive train of life. I'm just doing my thing. And it's so nice to be able to have my husband make a great meal and me not say, could you get that scale out? I can only have many ounces of this. And don't forget, you can have that, but I don't eat that, remember? And just, hey, whatever. And it kind of becomes a thing of where, yeah. And then if there's some meals that I have that aren't, that I wouldn't say not satisfying, they're just not as high of a level of satisfaction or satiating to me, and I don't get freaked out about it. It's no big deal because there's always another meal that I'm going to sit. And I think the biggest thing is I learned this in relationships too. Allow yourself to be surprised and not have an expectation. And I don't expect every meal to be a thrilling roller coaster ride full of all these emotions that people say there are. But when it comes, I can notice it like in a minute, like, huh, that was so satisfying. For instance, I have some of these thin pretzels that from Trader, I don't want to say where, well, now you all know they're from Trader Joe's, and they're with white chocolate and peppermint on there. And I bought like a couple extra bags just because they're not going to have them in a couple weeks. But it's so nice to open the bag and have a bunch of them in there. Like I have 4 bags in there, but they'll probably, who knows how long they'll last me. I didn't buy them to hoard them. I bought them because I truly enjoy them. And now instead of eating half the bag or the whole bag and making myself sick, I found that there's no judgment of eating 1 or 2. It's not that I'm a good person because I only ate 1 or 2. It just means that when I say that, I don't want people to think they can't have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, whatever you have. But I just had to shovel them all in. Whereas now for the holidays, I could eat them. And I notice when I'm being a little bit more present too, or even when I'm not, it's not as exciting anymore. And then I can stop. And I think when you're satisfied and you really understand what satisfaction is, there's not a fear element to being afraid it's not going to be available again. And I say that because in France and Italy, I always want my crepe, thinking, oh, I'm not going to get a crepe until I come back. If I would have said that 2 years ago, I would have eaten 100 crepes. But I haven't been back to France to get a crepe. But guess what? They have them here. And guess what? I'll be back to France again and I'll have a crepe. And when I eat it, I'm going to enjoy it. There's not this mad rush and desire and panicky feeling to eat it all, because when I did that, I never savored anything. Nothing was satisfying, and I wouldn't allow myself to be surprised about anything. I had an expectation that I have to eat this all because I'm expecting to get back on a diet. So I wasn't surprised, and this is a season for surprises.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
think allowing yourself to be surprised sometimes, like, wow, this is surprisingly satisfying. I think too, when you get into intuitive eating and you do one of the principles of allowing all foods, you allow yourself some of the foods that you restricted earlier in your day of restriction, and you're starting to be a little surprised, like, wow, I'm surprised. I restricted this because, and that could go both ways. Like, I restricted this because to me it was off my plan. But now that I know I can have this, it's really not all that. It's not my jam anymore. And I'm like, that's interesting. That's surprising to me. And just sit with curiosity too is such a big thing. Compassion and curiosity of, I didn't think I'd like this. I didn't like this before. And surprisingly, this is quite satisfying. And when something's satisfying, your body and you kind of know intrinsically and intuitively that there's completion. I really don't need any more. And until the next time I have that, I'll eat it until I have completion. And I think that's kind of a big thing. So,
Yeah, I love how you said bringing in the curiosity and the compassion around each eating experience too, and the curiosity of, how is this pretzel gonna taste, or this chocolate covered pretzel gonna taste this year, and is it gonna be satisfying? Is there anything I want to do different? How many of these pretzels do I want to eat to feel satisfied and enjoy it? I and the piece what you're kind of speaking to, and I just want to highlight, is this not putting conditions on eating those foods. The conditions of, oh, I can only have a certain amount, or I need to work out or go exercise a certain amount because I ate a certain amount, or I have exercised a certain amount so I can eat now a certain amount of foods. Like those are all conditions, as is well, I can eat whatever during the holidays because January is coming. That's a condition. And so,
yeah.
like you were saying, like, when you give yourself that full permission to enjoy whatever the flavors of the season are without those conditions, then you free up your mind space to be
Oh,
surprised of what are those flavor nuances and the texture nuances. And I also want to highlight, that doesn't mean that you're going to like everything that you eat. That doesn't mean that every meal, snack, whatever during this time of year is going to be pleasurable or is going to be satisfying, because it's also a busy time of year. And even in COVID style, people are busy with scheduling Zoom calls with their families or doing holiday shopping and having things delivered and all of that. So giving people almost permission to say that you're not always going to savor and be satisfied. Sometimes we just need to eat and get the job done because your body
yeah.
needs nourishment. And that's part
Yeah.
of savoring your body, is by nourishing it.
Yeah.
And
Self
the
care.
other thing that I wanted to highlight that you said, and you talked about getting those bags of pretzels, making sure that you have enough of whatever the food is. So
Yeah.
whether that's making sure you bought enough from the store or making sure that you bought enough ingredients to make the dish, like, maybe someone has a family recipe of some holiday cookies or whatever. Well, making sure that you have ingredients to maybe make 2, 3, 4, whatever batches of those cookies. It's not, again, not putting that condition around, like, oh, I'm just going to make one batch. Like, one batch, that's what we get. Like, we get to have the taste of the season, and that's it. Like,
Yeah.
I see this a lot with, probably even more so in the last couple of years. I don't know if you see this too, of people saying, yeah, I don't diet. I allow myself to have the holiday foods and everything. But there's still a restriction around that. Like, I'm
Mhm.
only allowing myself to have this much of the holiday foods. And so that concept of having enough on hand, enough ingredients on hand, being able to make several different um, recipes of that cookie, like making several batches over and
Yeah.
over again, if that's what you need. And I think that that's oftentimes the biggest sticking point for folks with healing their relationship with food and being able to savor food, is that fear of, well, if I have enough, I'm just going to keep eating and eating and eating.
Right.
I'm going to keep plowing through those 4 bags of pretzels. And that fear is so real in the beginning. And I often have to tell folks, like, you're just gonna have to trust me on this, because you are not gonna always want that same bag of pretzels, the chocolate covered
Mhm.
pretzels. Like, I'm just gonna guess here, but come January or February, when that snack is not available at Trader Joe's, now that you bought enough when it is available, maybe you get to that time of the year and you're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm ready to move on to something else. And it's
Yeah.
not because, like, oh, I'm not having those anymore because now I can get back on track. It's more just, I've had enough to satisfy the flavor that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And when you have that concept of enough, I think is really foundational to the savoring part and the satisfaction part with food. You have to have enough.
You
And if
do.
that means you plow through your 4 bags and Trader Joe's still has some in stock, you go buy some more. I mean, the number doesn't matter. It's the, yeah, again, getting back to that embodiment piece of checking in with your body. Have you had enough? And when we have
Right.
enough, that sexy allure of, getting away with, quote unquote, of having those foods isn't there. Like they just become
No,
chocolate pretzels. What's the big
that's
deal?
right.
They're tasty, but it's still just chocolate pretzels. Um, so I just wanted to highlight that too, that's those concepts of enough are certain super important, and the concepts of unconditional permission to
Yeah.
eat the food year
Oh,
round. But we just
oh yeah.
even more in our face, I think, at the holidays.
That's so important because we have this thing, most of us that are privileged to have a house called a freezer. And if you're gonna make a batch of something, to me, and I don't think this is just the flight attendant in me. This is just the being practical part of me that I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna make a batch of cookies, why wouldn't I make two? We can freeze them. Everything freezes so great. And then you can pull it out as needed. And oh, I feel like having a cookie. You could put it in the microwave for 5 seconds. It's defrosted. I tell my husband when I first started this, I lived in such what's the opposite of enough when I what was it called?
Deprivation.
Yes, I'd always have um I'm always going to allow myself this much. And it was super rigid and super controlled. And now to have enough means I'm free at any time I want, however much I want to have it. And that being one of the biggest things, I think that's when people get into their first step of intuitive eating is allowing all foods when you want, however much you want, at any time you want. And my husband said, "Is that healthy?" And I'm like, well, it is for someone that's kind of restricted most of their life, it's kind of normalizing that, desensitizing myself around that. Because now it's interesting that you say this. I had done one particular, I'm not going to say what it is, one of these plans that I did, or one of these ridiculous things that I did, required you to eat a lot to like stuff yourself, because you needed to do that because you weren't going to eat for a while and you needed the sustenance for 2 days until this other thing kicked in. I was like, that is ridiculous. And I remember thinking, oh, this is so fun. I get to eat all this stuff they want me to kind of gorge, or whatever you'd call it. They really want me to load up. So I would go do all the things, that you do when you're on a diet, when you want to have a binge, or when you're like, I only have like 2 days left before I get on my diet. So I'm going to go to all the crappy, eat all the things that I normally wouldn't eat. And you plan it, or you might go to the store to get all this stuff. And you're kind of crazy when you're doing it. Um, and you're going to eat it all now. And I just remember thinking, I had to do this for 2 or 3 days. And I think after the end of the first day, I ate so much, I'm like, I can't wait to start this plan of eating healthier because this doesn't feel good in my body. So, ding, 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 that should have been the big clue. That right there, I go back to that every time when I think of intuitive eating. It's like, yeah, you can have it. But at some point, do you and your body really want it? And when I say you won't really want it, people think, I do want it, I will want it. But that's because they're still thinking that they're separate from their body. They wouldn't think that if they were embodied. And so that tells me right there, they haven't experienced embodiment. Wow, what a
Yeah.
big surprise they're in for when they finally get to feel that.
Yeah, and they're still experiencing not enoughness, restriction. I think that's one of the things that there's a lot of fear of letting go around that restriction. And especially when people see their body change as they let go of that restriction. And if someone's been restricting for a really long time, their body is going to change because
Yeah.
it's going, holy smoke, she's finally feeding me now. um, and to sit with that and be able to trust your body and move through that learning enoughness, learning full unconditional permission. Like you have to move through that whole process and come out on the other side, and your body's going to do what it's going to do as you move through that process. But as
Right.
long as you're stuck in a restriction mentality or a deprivation mentality, there will always be backlash eating. There will
Oh,
always be that fear will always be there. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that folks have with intuitive eating or doing the practice of intuitive eating. But, and this is the big but, I've seen this too many times in my clients when they do move through that part of intuitive eating and they come out on the other side of it. And I think you mentioned this earlier, the freedom that comes with that. The noticing how much better food tastes, or the noticing how much just more satisfying the whole eating experience is when you're not constantly running that inner dialogue of the conditions. What do I have to do to make up for it? What do I have to, um, how am I going to, quote unquote, fix my body after having this? Like, those thoughts aren't there anymore. You're
no.
actually able to sit into that moment. And so I hope as folks are listening to us describe this, and I'm so grateful for you sharing your individual experience about that, that they can hear and they can start to trust even more so that having enough, having unconditional permission to eat enough of a food period, or certain types of foods, or holiday foods, is so key to coming into the new year with a more peaceful, stable, healthy relationship with food in your body. And knowing that that's going to feel uncomfortable at times, and that's okay. It
Yeah.
is part of the journey, and it's not going to be like that forever.
Right. I think
Like,
too, when physically there's enough food for you and mentally there's enough food for you,
mhm,
there's also this other thing of embodiment that happens, that you feel like enough. If
yes.
you ever felt like
Mhm,
enough, no matter what your size is, would we even try to manipulate things? So maybe that starts at a deeper level too. So when you
mhm,
have enough food and you really know that at that one level that you really know, I can do this, I have enough food, you start thinking and toying also with the idea of, and I'm enough. I am enough, because it's funny, anytime, like you said, when you start denying satisfaction, it always backfires. It's like the pendulum, it has to go one way. If I've denied this much, at some point it's got to come with the same force, or at least back to the middle, before it starts kind of evening out and just kind of settling there right in the middle. And that middle place is where you are emotionally, physically, maybe with your weight. And that takes time for that pendulum to figure out, depending on how you want to move through this, how quickly you want to just lean into things. If you lean into it and just feel it, that pendulum starts calming down quicker, I think. For me, it did. And, it's super common for people that have restricted to do that. Yeah, if you people think I'm just going to eat, and I'm never going to quit. Well, you might do that. I did that for about 2 weeks, not to the degree I did when I did that one eating plan, but I did. I remember thinking, of course, that's human nature to, if someone tells you, yeah, you know what, you can have that. You can have a piece of bread every day now. Well, for crying out loud, I'm going to have a sandwich every day. And then you'd kind of figure
mhm,
out, like, I think there's more things to eat for lunch than a sandwich. And I've tuckered myself out on a sandwich. And now that I know I can have that, great, that's there. Now I'm going to have something else. Oh, a salad sounds really good. And I always find it funny this time of year, people have made baked goods. And you know me, I love a lot of things. I don't hate anything, but there's a few things that I might not be keen on. But that was part of the discovery process of being, allow myself to be surprised. Surprisingly, I don't like a lot of things. Like, I might like a little bit of it. I might like a half of a peanut butter cookie instead of the whole thing. I used to make fun of people that would leave half a cookie or one bite of something. I was like, oh, for crying out loud, just eat it. Who does that? Who leaves a cookie or a bite of cake on the plate? Who does that? I mean, people that have a healthy relationship with food do that. And I think that that's funny, because When I was, when you talked about freedom, one of the songs that goes through my mind when I was in Italy is I felt free. I felt free that there wasn't this contention between me and myself. She was together now. She wasn't separate. Audra wasn't over here chastising me for, oh, you shouldn't have eaten that. That's okay. You're gonna get back on the diet when you get home. No, you shouldn't have done this. But I did, but you're enjoying it. And this back and forth is freaking exhausting. And I sat up there thinking, it's freedom. Freedom means you have more. I can think about this. I can have conversations with my husband about something else other than food. I can talk about something else other than a diet, and I think of that song because this is what's really funny is we went that night to have a cocktail before dinner, and in the bar they were playing old 80s music, and they were playing that song Freedom by George Michael, and I'm like, ooh, I
Mhm.
love that song. Oh, and I just felt like, it's so exciting to have that freedom because you have an appreciation for it. I think too, what's great is people that have always had a great relationship with food, great, but they might not have had another great relationship with something else. They've always had the privilege of being a normal eater. But you know what? Maybe this happened in my life so that I could become a normal eater. And also, you can apply it to every area in your life. So these skills that you teach and you guide people through and coach people through, yeah, you know what? But then you start thinking, huh, I should be able to have surprise and satisfaction with this, with friendships, with relationships, with my career. And if I don't, how can I use these things that I used before to work through this? And so it's kind of a cool thing because then once you have that skill set, you can have the choice to help it, in other areas of your life that might not be satisfying enough.
Yes, and I think that that's honestly a perfect place to kind of hit pause and continue that conversation in another video, and it's a great another topic for Savor Food and Body show too. I know you and I could yak about this stuff forever,
Follow your
but
guts.
but bringing but have continuing the conversation around how when you find the ability to savor food and body, finding satisfaction with food and your body, how that trickles into the rest of life. I think that's a great continuation
Yeah.
conversation. And for those of you listening and watching, there's a link on the bottom of the screen there for the Savor Food and Body private Facebook group, and Audra and I are in there regularly answering people's questions about how to start your own intuitive eating practice and savor food and body journey. And we'd love for you to join us over there. We are toying around with the idea of doing some weekly coffee talk chats just like this. And so stay tuned to that Facebook group to join us there. If you're interested, you can also learn more about this too. You can also download, there's a free guide on alpinenutrition.org, and it is a free guide to savor food and body. So it includes I think there's even 6 steps. I think there's a bonus step in there and it's a workbook on how you can work through starting your own savor food and body practice. And I've had a lot of great feedback from folks that have downloaded that guide, and it helped them kind of kickstart that healing process. Like Audra said, it's not a one and done process. It involves a lot of self reflection and getting individual help if that's what you need to. But it's so worth it. It's so worth finding that peace with food and your body again. So, Audra, I just want to thank you for being here today and sharing your story. I think that it's so impactful when individuals that have gone through the journey, have gone through the work, and continue to practice. When people like you can share your stories, I think it's so inspiring to help other people, no matter where they are in their journey with making peace with food. It helps them understand, like, oh, I'm not alone in this, and there is still more to come if I keep doing this work. So, thank you so much for being here and sharing. And can't wait till when we can do this again. I think this has been
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank
Yeah.
you, Amanda.
Thank you. Okay, we will see you guys next time. Have a great week and take care.